Alrighty, here we are back again for Invisible Hand, third edition, or part 3. Alright, so the last round was about how profit equalization happened naturally, and how that was good, provided that the greed, I want to call it that, it's definitely what it is. Somebody's trying to make as much money as they can. If it's honest greed, it's good. Good not just for them, but good for all of us. Right? If they're not doing it by sleight of hand or pulling the wool over your eyes or telling you that promising something that they're not going to have no intention of doing, or because there's some fine print that means they don't really have to do it anyway. No, that's not good. Okay? But honest greed is a good thing. Right? The honest greed is, Mr. So-and-so, Ms. So-and-so, sorry, I'm not going to continue to serve you in this capacity because I've discovered that I can make more money doing something else. Pull the shutters down, close the door, or maybe not do that. Just put up a different sign. I used to make X. Sorry, I make Z now. Okay? That's good, right? Even though you as a buyer may be disappointed. You might have been a great maker of X. May not have been marginal in the quality sense. But because maybe he's just plain great at making a lot of things, because he's a good learner and, he or she, the business person, just keeps moving up the ladder to where they can make more and more money. And it's actually good, right? Even though it looks like they're a scallywag just trying to make more money out of us. But they're moving resources to higher and better uses. That's why economists have so much struggle, is because so many things that happen naturally can be made to look, by some spinmeister, can be made to look so ugly. And sometimes it is ugly. But in the vast majority of cases, there's nothing ugly about it. It improves society's wealth position overall, right? Moving resources from lower profit industries to higher profit industries is a good thing for all of us most of the time, when done honestly. Okay, and the fact that it seems like such a rat race out there because all these industries, you have to be really good at something. Yeah, isn't that nice that to just survive at producing something to make enough money to cover, you better be pretty good, right? Yeah, that's good for the buyer of the product. Competition forces out of every industry those that are not very good at it. Leaves only that are the most efficient doers of something to be able to make money at doing something. But from the producer's perspective, that's not so great. Right? So there's another natural inclination that follows from this that is actually also good. Is, if I want to make some serious money, how can I do that? I could invent something that nobody's doing. Then I wouldn't have any competition at all. Well, I can't stop them from entering the industry ever. Get a patent, I can keep them out for a while. You can see there's a lot of creative people out there. And if they can take an existing product or concept or identify a want or need in society and invent a good or service that meets it and does it better than other ways of meeting it, if there's already something out there that addresses a certain want or need, they can rake in some serious, serious money for a while. And that also, doesn't that also seem nasty? Yeah, it does. But it's the incentive to do that. It's what drives innovation and all these wonderful new gadgets and services that we have. And I can tell you from the last year that I've gone through, I wouldn't even be in front of this camera right now. I might not even be alive. But for some of those innovations that have occurred because somebody thought of some drug or medical procedure that they could make an awful lot of money on if they could perfect it to where it had low downsides and work to take bad things out of people's bodies or medicate them against something that was irritating them. I'm glad they were able to make a lot of money for a while. That's enough. Okay, see, that's the idea behind a patent. So far, we have yet to figure out, or at least politically accept, a better way of incentivizing innovation is a patent. Okay, a 17-year monopoly, I think it's called, although I'm certainly generalizing. I'm sure the patent laws aren't that uniform that every single innovation is a 17. Somewhere I heard that. But that's the basic idea behind a patent, is that for a fixed time period, you're going to be a monopolist. That's your reward, is to be able to charge more than marginal cost. And If you had a good invention, that would be more than average cost for your product. So in other words, you're going to make above normal product for a good invention for quite a while. And then after that, market entry, people are going to crowd into your industry. It's just going to be another industry where profit is going to tend to be normal, because people exit if profit falls below normal and enter it if it happens to be above normal. The constant sort of churn, exit, entry, creative destruction, if you will. Right? Because some industries are becoming obsolete. That's where that creative destruction comes from. Okay? You destroy some things, cannibalize resources from some things to make them available to produce other things. See, and if you used to work in that old industry, that doesn't sound so good. And again, you may be tempted to go up in the voting booth, and there's that button for person X, the representative that's running for office, that says, if you elect him, he's going to promise to make sure your industry is kept alive. That somehow he's going to make it so that people have to buy your product. And you go, oh, I'm so tired. I don't want to have to, I'm in my mid-career. I don't want to have to learn some new skill to make a living. Representative X, you get my vote, all right, to keep my industry going. Isn't that an unbelievable temptation? It's not good for society. That industry needs to be destroyed. Does that mean we're just totally callous about the people that are in that industry that either don't want to, maybe a little bit callous towards them, or just literally they're so late in their careers that, maybe they're mid-50s, early 60s. Wow, to learn something totally new. At that point, maybe we should have a government program that helps them transition to another vocation of some kind, or just make it easier for them to retire early. Okay, we have to have a heart, so to speak, to soften the hard edges of the free market, because the free market's not going to care about them. Right? The free market says, hey, somebody just invented something, and people are willing to spend big bucks on that stuff, price way above marginal cost, and stampede those resources to there, right? And anything that looks like it's even marginal, where resources are just barely yielding a decent profit and doesn't look like it's going to last much longer because something else has been invented that's better. The free market, brutal. Just move those resources from old and soon to be perhaps obsolete industry to what's new. But sadly, from an efficiency perspective, from a total wealth perspective, that's good for society. We need to find, from an efficiency perspective, we need to find some way for that process to move forward. Boredom with normal profit to drive innovation, okay, and also with patent laws to make sure that innovation is profitable enough for long enough so that people invest enough in making those innovations. Innovation isn't just something that people do at nights and on weekends in their garage. Sometimes to do tests and try things can take a long time. I'm trying to remember the example of Thomas Edison working on the light bulb. He went through a lot of work with his team. He had a team of innovators. That's all they did. I learned this at a museum in Michigan, in Dearborn, Michigan. He had a team of people that was just all about trying to invent things. And they weren't working for nothing. They had a lot of opportunity costs, a lot of other things they could be doing. Okay, so for Thomas Edison and company to find this to be profitable, they focused only on innovations that were likely to yield some serious bucks for quite a while to get a return on their investment. They'd invent a lot of things that were total duds. The few things that they invented that were not total duds had to pay for all those experiments that it led to it's like drilling for oil. Most of the holes poked in the ground find no oil. The one hole poked in the ground that finds the oil has got to pay for all the dry holes. And of course, the one that yielded the oil. It's the same thing in innovation. The few good innovations have to pay for all the bad ones. I often tell people when I have time to talk to them, which, sadly, I don't have time to talk to everybody as long as they'd like to talk to me. I think that's true for all of us. But I say, I love your ideas as long as your heart isn't broken when I don't accept them. Because, you see, I might find one great idea out of the 10 ideas that they pose. Got to listen to the other 9, to get that 10th one. Maybe the best one was the first idea and I just didn't know it, and 10 more were rattled off where it was, the last 9 weren't very good, but the first one was really good. that first idea has to be brilliant enough to pay for the other cost of the other duds. Back to Thomas Edison. He spent a long, long time to find a filament for a light bulb that was just decently functional at yielding light, a decent amount of light for a reasonable amount of time. I mean, he started with a light filament that, would yield a little bit of light for 10 minutes and then, it would fizzle out. That's not long enough. You're going to buy a light bulb that costs any kind of amount of money if it only yields light for 10 minutes. So he went through a lot of stuff and a lot of time before he found the one that worked the longest. And even since then, we've greatly improved on that. But at least he eventually found one that said, aha, I found one that I think we can sell for enough money, because the light bulb would last long enough and be produced cheap enough that people would buy it at a price that exceeded the cost of production. All right, so boredom with normal I better redefine that. I've used the word normal a bunch of times. What does normal profit mean? Economic profit is normal when it's zero. Again, I know that almost has to be, for an economics student, has to be somewhat of a shocker every time you hear that. How can a zero profit be normal or good? Or when we have a normal profit across all, how can that possibly be good? Well, remember what zero means. It means that the rate of profit is just barely enough to cover opportunity costs. Okay? And some opportunity costs are only implicit. All right? So that means you're actually making money, right? The explicit opportunity costs are the ones where you have to write a check, right? Spend real money to pay for them. The implicit opportunity costs are the ones where there was another way to use your time, your money, your other resources that would have made you money, and you said, I'm not using them that way, I'm using them this way. Okay? So when the price you get covers all the costs of the resources that you used, including the things you turned down, all right, the other uses of your resources, you're doing okay. See, and it's normal that that's a standard, right? Because when profit rises above normal in some industries, the marginal producers, those that can shift industries and are willing to, okay, will say, my normal profit isn't as good as somebody's above normal profit, I'm moving. Okay, and that raises the profit level. Get my hand in the right place here. That raises the profit level where they left, and it lowers the profit level where they end up. See, and that's a wealth-creating natural process. Again, for the people involved, it's not always fun. The market process is a brutal way of maximizing wealth to society as a whole that the individual people might have liked to have kept a little bigger share of the existing pie, which might have meant a little bigger share than they would have of the growing pie. In other words, their piece of the existing pie might be bigger than even the amount that they get in the larger pie, if we let the pie being the total amount of goods and services we have, if we let this brutal process proceed as it naturally does. Oh well, you see, people get comfortable with the status quo. The market just kind of rolls over that, creatively destroying as it moves forward. We, through our government, can do things sometimes for better overall, sometimes costs exceeding benefits, not so good overall, when we try to soften some of those hard edges of the market, brutally pursuing efficiency, but sometimes because of externalities and not enough competition, creating some inefficiency. All right, so do we automatically have an invisible hand? I mean, is it always there, or is it sometimes suppressed? Well, the answer is that in the world we live in today, sadly, it's mostly suppressed. Many political processes, at least in terms of economic efficiency, in terms of the total amount of goods and services for their people to share and to consume has been massively diminished. And maybe they've accepted it as yeah, you know, we gladly give up the difference between this big pie we could have versus this much smaller pie that we do have, because now it's more fair and more stable or something. But in many cases, it's not a conscious choice. They just overreacted, or somebody that had something didn't want change and they wanted it protected from change. And so as a result, they're in poverty. They lack the institutions that support the workings of the invisible hand at all. In some places, they didn't know how much they would suppress the beneficial effects of the invisible hand when they thought they were addressing some of the hard edges of the market, making it more fair or more fair. I think it's good enough for this point. All right, so what do we mean by some of those institutions? And this is where we're going to end up on this discussion of the invisible hand. If we want the invisible hand, the brutal pursuit of efficiency, to be the starting point from which we tinker around the edges a little bit to keep most of that, then these are the institutions that we need to have in place. Okay? One of those is called the rule of law. What does that mean? Well, equality before the law. And that one of the things that's a law is keeping your promises. Okay? So that's an essential part of markets functioning, that among the things that's a private property right, okay, that will be enforced. Part of the rule of law is enforcement of property rights, private property rights, or the government's property rights, the same thing. Okay, so what is, for example, let's suppose that if you make a deal to deliver some of your product to somebody at a certain price, well, if you knew the courts weren't going to enforce that, that would be just a joke. Right? And so there would be no such deals. Okay, but if you knew you could go to the court and say, look, last year Joe agreed to take this product at this price on these dates. I met my end of the deal. I delivered the amount of the product on those dates. And then Joe didn't pay me, or he decided to pay me less than we'd agreed upon. Court, make me whole. Show the rest of the world or the rest of our country that when you make a deal with somebody else, that if you didn't do it fraudulently, that deal must be kept. Okay, or as we economists say, a deal is a deal, right? Willing buyer, willing seller, shaking hands. Get my hand here in the middle here. Shaking hands means that you've made a lawfully enforceable commitment. Now, you may regret making it later on, but hey, so that's another thing is buyer and seller beware, because one of the things that supports a free market is the rule of law, including enforcement of property rights, enforcement of contracts. A deal is a contract. All right. Another thing that I have here on my list is price signals must be accurate. Okay? Almost goes without saying from our course so far, but no, it doesn't go without saying, is that we need to correct the price signals to include all the costs and all the benefits as much as we can in an imperfect world where it costs something to do those corrections in some cases. In some cases, it may cost more to do the correction than the correction's worth. So we're not going to achieve perfection. But price signals need to convey to buyers what that product costs society, what it is we're giving up in terms of ability to produce other things. Another way you often hear that is people need to know what things cost in order for their private decisions to be societally beneficial. I never invented that term before. To be beneficial to society, to be socially optimal decisions, right? That's not asking too much. Signal people what the true cost of things are, and then they can act selfishly, or in case of producers, greedily, and in so doing, benefit society. Cool, huh? Okay, clear information, okay, through the price signal and maybe through other signals. Like if you eat this stuff, it'll hurt you. Okay, oh, well, I didn't know that. This stuff tastes really good. I didn't know it would, do things gradually and kill me. Oh, well, darn, it tastes good. Oh, well, I guess better not have it, or not have it. Just have it rarely. Right? We all know products like that, right? It's like, doggone it, I wish I could eat that stuff more often. It sure tastes good at the time. Doggone it. If I eat that stuff too often, these bad things happen to me. Darn. Okay? Clear signals so that when we know what things cost, we make decisions on our own selfish behalf that then maximize benefits to society. All right. Sound money. We've never discussed this before. Maybe you've had macroeconomics because it's here at UTSA, it's a lower course number. Can't believe what a painful bureaucratic process it is to change a course number for something. But students should definitely, which is why they often take macro before micro. Students should definitely take micro before macro. Isn't it more important to understand the little pieces of things, business firms and consumers and price signals and all that, before you figure out what unemployment and inflation and GDP and all that stuff's going to be? I think so. And our department has agreed that we're going to encourage students to take micro before macro, but not always. So sound money. All right. So I got off on a little tangent there about knowing about the pieces before the wholes. Sound money is something that you may have heard about in macro. Well, that's a key ingredient of a process that encourages the invisible hand to work as well as possible. Right? If people can't trust money to hold their value, why would they try to make as much money as possible? Why would they trust money even as a means of exchange, much less as a store of value? Okay? If we can't trust the money authorities in the United States, that's the Federal Reserve, to keep money at just about the right amount. And they're human too. They're not perfect. Okay? But they've got to make judgments based on the condition of the economy, how much additional money, typically the economy is growing, to make available to keep the economy humming along, to keep the invisible hand enabled to work its magic. It really is magic. It's unbelievable. When we're free to pursue our self-interest, almost always the price system maximizes how many goods and services we can have. It's awesome. No bureaucracy, total freedom to pursue self-interest within the limits of our income and our creativity and our limited time. And then the sum total of good will increase. Again, externalities, not enough competition, insufficient information, those things need to be addressed for the invisible hand to work as well as possible. So another supportive condition, one could argue, are entities, public or private, to make people better informed, which starts with schooling, okay, which just makes us able to read and write and understand history and that kind of thing to make good judgments. Okay, so have a solid, well-working school system. And I work in that area in my research quite a bit, so I want to make sure you understand what a school system is. It's not the public school system. It turns out that in our country, the public school system is about 90% of the school system. The school system is all the schooling, the formal schooling options, public and private. Our school system, our funding and governance processes have led to that situation of 90% public school system and only 10% private, because you have to pay twice to go to a private school, right? You got to pay your taxes that support the public school system, and if you don't think that's working well for your children, then on top of that you have to go send them to a private school and pay the tuition on top of that. That's why occasionally you hear people propose tuition tax credits, okay, or tuition vouchers, or education savings accounts, because they think that school systems, public plus private, would work better if it was easier for people to choose a private alternative to the public school system, if that cost disadvantage was evened out, right? The public school system doesn't cost anything on top of the taxes you have to pay whether you use the public school system or not. All right, so we need people to be well informed in order for the invisible hand to produce efficient outcomes. So in addition to just generally a school system, maybe we want the government to have some bureaus that are actively involved in informing people about the specific nature of certain goods and services, and what ingredient lists the producers have to put on them, so we can look at the product and say, oh, this has that much as the main ingredient, and so on and so forth. Oh, wow, I didn't know that stuff had that in it. Oh, well, it tastes good, but I better not eat it. Okay, so it wouldn't hurt to have some information about the ingredients in our products, right? And or maybe some information how to use certain products well to not hurt ourselves with them, for example. All right, so sound money, good information, doesn't necessarily have to be produced publicly, could be, right? Because it's a public good, right? Once you put information out, everybody can use it. It doesn't diminish its availability to others. A true public good, and the government can often be the best provider of that. Defense against external threats. The invisible hand does not work well when people are looking over their shoulders wondering if somebody's going to fly an airplane into their skyscraper. Okay, or if they're wondering whether some foreign power is going to unleash an attack on them or cut off their supply of some critical import. Okay, so we have to tax ourselves at least, well, two things so far. We have to tax ourselves to provide courts. Hold my thumb up where you can see it. Well, there's my these backwards. Okay. One thing we absolutely positively, no disagreement on this. None at all. I mean, libertarians agree with this. Liberals agree with this. Conservatives agree with this. We must tax ourselves to provide for courts, right? Not just for the people that break the law, right? To decide whether they're guilty or not and how long to send them to prison if they are. Okay, but to enforce contracts, right? Because the contract has to be enforceable or the market system will not work. Okay? And then the other one is justice, including contract enforcement, and then defense. Right? There almost always are some external threats. Okay? So we have to invest some of our resources in creating a credible deterrent to that, or if it still doesn't credibly deter people, to repel the attacks. All right. Last but not least, the invisible hand definitely likes certainty, likes stability. So that's pretty much sums all of that up, and that is you want your policies to support it to be in place, and you want those policies to look like they're not likely to disappear by some crony figuring out some way to be treated differently than somebody else. So clean government is important. The perception that the government isn't owned and purchased by special interests or a person with some connections. And you're probably pretty cynical about that. So am I. There is no such government that has none. So we're constantly going to have to be on guard against somebody being tempted to cross over to saying, government doesn't pay all that well, but boy, the power that I have to do things, if I use that power in ways that benefit others, I could collect some serious bucks. Human nature being what it is, we know that greed exists, and that's exactly what the invisible hand seeks to harness for social good. It's not always a positive force, so we're always going to need to police that to make sure that our institutions are appropriate and stable. All right. Wow, I've nearly talked the whole 1 hour and 50 minutes that this video was meant to replace, which is, well, okay, why not? That's kind of remarkable. Usually when you think that it's going to replace it, it's usually way less than the hour and 15 minutes because it doesn't include all the interaction time where there's Q&A. All right, well, this is no problem because I will actually be present for the day that this will replace. So we can have that discussion. that wraps it up. Remember, the fun never ends unless you let it. So don't let it.